Okay, in this video we're going to see how to connect USB controllers to RetroPie, and the version I'm looking at is RetroPie 3 Beta 4, and it's important that you use at least Beta 4 because previous versions do this in a slightly different way, so there are differences with different versions of RetroPie to deal with the USB controllers. There are only small differences, but it's worth bearing in mind. Future versions, after version 3 Beta 4, probably do it in a very similar way to this, or at least I would have thought for a while, so it's quite a useful tip on how to get these set up quickly and easily. Okay, so looking at the USB controllers that you might have plugged in, at the moment in my Raspberry Pi I've got two USB controllers plugged in, and I've also got a keyboard plugged in, and you can see as I've started booting it up, we've got Emulation Station and it says welcome, 2 gamepads detected. Now if Emulation Station had had a USB controller plugged in that it already knew about, you wouldn't see the welcome screen. It will skip the welcome screen if it can detect an input device that it knows can use it. So that's the reason why you'll see a welcome screen, because Emulation Station hasn't got any inputs. So it's seen 2 of them, 2 of my joypads, because that's what I'm looking to set. And when we do this, we are setting the inputs for Emulation Station, which is the interface to navigate between the systems and choose your game. And separately within this process, it will also configure from the Beta 4 version, it will also configure the RetroArch controllers. So any emulator that uses a RetroArch, as a front end will also have its controller set. And that's quite a few emulators, particularly for the Mega Drive, SNES, the NES, the Master System. Quite a lot of them use libretro cores, which all you have RetroArch as the front end. But I'll show you the back end of that in a minute so you can see what's happening. So when you've got your system booted up, Emulation Station should detect the ones you've plugged in. And you can see briefly, if I hold a button, like it says here, hold a button on your device to configure it. If I briefly hold one, at the bottom of the screen you'll see it tell me what name that is. If I hold that for a second or two, the USB popped up. I'm not holding it down too long because I'll configure it then. USB. And the other joypad is a different make, the name will appear differently. So if I hold that, there, just USB gamepad. Okay, so you should see that popping up. Now the 2 controllers I've got they're both sort of SNES style controllers. One's an iBuffalo, which is pretty well recommended by a lot of people for this sort of retro USB game usage. It's a pretty solid controller and is really similar to an original SNES controller. Then the other controller is same sort of aesthetically, it looks really similar. It's called RetroLink, and it's a bit more of a sort of generic USB pad. It looks in the same style as a SNES controller, but the buttons don't have the colours on. It's just sort of a violet and purple shade on the USB buttons. So it is a different controller, and as you can see by the text appearing at the bottom, it's detected as a different name as well. So I've got 2 separate ones. This if you've got multiple controllers that are the same type, you only really need to plug one in and configure that, and then whichever one you plug in, it's going to get detected. So it's in some ways a bit easier. You just plug one in and configure it and you should be okay. So first thing I'll do is configure, let's do the iBuffalo one first. So if I hold down the button for longer, there we go, you get into the configure section. And this is pretty self-explanatory. You just tap the corresponding button. So I've got D-pad up, down, left, right, start select, A, B, X, Y. And left bottom and the sort of left top, if you like, refers to the shoulder buttons. And for the purpose of RetroArch, because these buttons aren't used in Emulation Station at all, so it doesn't really care about these. It's only asking for the RetroArch side of the emulation to let you play the games, because all the buttons we've just selected will let you use Emulation Station fine already. These are just for the games to get them working. So the left bottom, if you've just got one shoulder, that is, it seems, interpreted as that one. So that's the one you want to press here, left bottom and right bottom. Now, I haven't got any more shoulder buttons, so I haven't got left top, right top. In fact, I haven't got any more of the other options to press because I haven't got any analog buttons on these controllers. So to skip that, like it says at the top, hold any button to skip. So I'm just going to hold down one of the ones that I pressed before. I'll just hold down B, and you get a little timer on the right, 1 second, 0 second, and it skips it, says not defined. So I'm going to keep doing that for all of these buttons that I haven't got. And you only have to do this once, so it doesn't take very long to skip through them. Not the most exciting bit of the video to watch, but it's useful to know that you can get by and miss any buttons that you don't have on your controller. You just hold down a key. There we go. Then it jumps to the OK. Now on the OK, it wants the Emulation Station OK to be pressed, and in effect that's your A button. So just tap A, and nothing immediately happens, but don't tap a load of buttons or get impatient. Just wait a minute, and after about 5 seconds or so, there it goes into Emulation Station. So in the back end there, it's just configuring the controllers correctly. So now, if I move left and right, I can see that everything's working fine there. And this is, like I said earlier, it's the beta 4 version. So the only thing that's slightly different, or the only thing that's different at all in any ways, I've got a Mega Drive icon. That's only because I've copied one ROM there. If I press A, go in, I can see I've got Sonic the Hedgehog, so I can test that. But what we can do as well, rather than to detect my other controller, basically the other options are I can use an in-game menu, which I'll do in a minute and show you an Emulation Station, or I could power down the Pi, pull out this controller and just leave the other controller in, and then Emulation Station would prompt me again to say, do you want to program that? So we could do that in the same way, just by rebooting and pulling out this controller. If I rebooted now and kept this controller in, Emulation Station would say, well, I can see a controller that I know how to use. I won't prompt you for anything, so you won't get that welcome screen again. So now I'm going to press the start button, and down here I've got configure input, and we've got back to that effectively welcome screen where you configure it. It's still got 2 gamepads detected, but now I'm going to pick up the other controller and hold down a button. There we go, and the same thing again. There we go, so I'm just configuring this in Emulation Station, which is probably the quickest and easiest way to do it. There is another way to do it outside of Emulation Station, which we'll see in a bit, but in terms of setting them up, this is probably the easiest way to do it. And again, bear in mind, whilst this will work and configure your controller for the RetroArch based emulators, Mega Drive being one of them, it won't configure it for emulators that maybe MAME-based emulators, FBA, the Spectrum one, C64 I think. But basically, yeah, if it's not going to use RetroArch, it can't auto-configure, and you'll have to probably manually edit some files. But vast majority it'll cover. Okay, so do that again, press A, just wait a second for it to write the files in the back end. There we go, done. So I just tapped A there and just waited. Okay, and I quit out that B. Now, I've set both of my controllers, so if I hold both the controllers there, if I go left with one, go right with the other, they both work at the same time in the same interface. So I'm just pressing both at the same time. They're both detected, it's all fine to use either. Okay, let's fire a game up. Now, one thing that's really useful and helpful to debug any issues excuse me, is when you start a game that's RetroArch based, at the bottom of the screen you'll get some yellow text that shows you, well, there's various messages you can get at the bottom, but when you start a game it will show you which USB controllers are detected, and that's really useful obviously to know whether the game is seeing your controller or not. So when I start this, just keep an eye out for yellow text at the bottom. Okay, press A to select it, and it kicks in and starts up. There we go, 0 and 1, so it detected 2 there. Flip between the two, it's pretty quick. You can always pause the video to check that out. Now I forget which one was 0 and which one was 1, and that can, although I can work it out here actually, it can be useful to know because in some games you can only use the first player one. Like this is quite a good example. Sonic will only use one of the controllers because it's a one player game. So if I press start on my RetroLink, this is the RetroLink USB, nothing's happening. So although I don't remember that yellow text, I'm guessing the USB gamepad was detected second. So if I pick up the iBuffalo one and press start, it should, yeah, there we go, it's detected. And I go right, left, down, up, and Jump's quite happy, so it's detected that and quite happy using it. Now when it detected it, it would also have programmed some default hotkeys. The most useful one is probably the start and select. You hold down start, select, tap start, and it will reset back to Emulation Station. Another useful one is hold down select and tap B, and that will reset the game. So I'll do that now. There we go. Now what I'm going to do is pull out one of these joypads, and you'll see that the RetroArch interface can sort of hot detect. It'll know what joystick's in, what one's been pulled out, and this way I could flip to use the RetroLink one by pulling out the iBuffalo. Actually, that's not technically true, it won't be happy with that, but I'll show you what happens when you pull it out, so it can detect joypads that you're plugging in. And it's probably more suited when there's a two-player game, but it still won't be happy with me putting this in again. You'll see what I mean anyway. I'll do that now. There you can see that auto detecting which one's pulled out and pulled in. Now when you look at the Raspberry Pi, let's assume you've got a Pi 2, you get 4 USB ports, and as you look at those 4, you've kind of got like a top left, a top right, a bottom left and a bottom right. And depending on which of those you plug your USB control pad into, it will decide to use as player number 1. So top left is effectively 1, and top right is 2, bottom left is 3, bottom right is 4. So whichever one you've got, the earliest port that you plug the USB pad into will be player 1. So if I put one pad in the bottom left one and one pad in the bottom right one, which are effectively 3 and 4, whatever one goes in 3 will be the player 1 because it's the first one in the order of 1, 2, 3, 4. If you plug it in the top left, that's going to be player 1 instead. So what I'm going to just quickly try actually unplugging both joypads and then plugging one into the top left, and I'm going to plug the RetroLink one in the top left just to see if it can do it on the fly. There, so I've unplugged the iBuffalo one altogether and I've just plugged in RetroLink. Press start. Yeah, I think that, or was that just bad timing for it down there? Nope, that's me. Yeah, so that will work. I think what wouldn't work is if I pulled out the RetroLink, the iBuffalo one, it wouldn't just automatically use the one that wasn't in that slot in the first place. Bit long-winded and confusing, but you get the gist. The point is, 4 USB ports, top left, top right, bottom left, bottom right. That's marked as 1, 2, 3, 4. So if you've got a one-player game, it's not going to use the controller that's further on. It's going to use the first one it finds in that sequence. So yeah, it's quite happy to use either controller, and whichever controller you use, they've all got hotkeys assigned to them. So if I did start select on this, it will boot back into Emulation Station. And I think that's all we need to see in this interface to sort of get the USB up and running. Like I say, there will be some emulators that don't use the RetroArch config files, so that isn't going to work for you, but for the majority, the Mega Drive, Super Nintendo, Master System, and a lot of the others there will be a libretro core, which is what plugs into the RetroArch front end, and it'll all work. Okay, so hold down select, press start. That's auto detected there, and I'm going to quit out of Emulation Station because the third way, if you like, if the first way was when Emulation Station boots, the second way within Emulation Station to add that other controller, a third way is to use the RetroPie setup script, which creates a RetroArch controller file. So I'm going to quit out of Emulation Station with start, and if I press quit and quit Emulation Station, say yes, then the text there says press a key so it doesn't boot back up in 5 seconds. So I just tapped a key on the keyboard, otherwise it would auto restart Emulation Station for you. Okay, so let's zoom in on this text area a bit more. Okay, so here we are at the terminal prompt, and what we're going to do is just check out what the settings were changed when we booted up into Emulation Station a minute ago. So first thing, in this directory, to see the hidden files, you can type ls space l hyphen lah. I think that's for long description, A for the hidden files, and H for human readable sizes, but I think I can just put ls hyphen A like that, and you can see all the hidden files. The hidden ones are the ones that are prefixed with the full stop. So what we're going to do is change into a directory called Emulation Station, which is cd space dot Emulation Station. Because I'll just go back a second, you can see if I did a normal list, I only get these two directories because they're the only non-hidden ones, but we can see all these hidden files and folders with the dot there. So I change into Emulation Station and list that directory, and it's this file here that Emulation Station reads to understand what the input options are for it, or what the controllers that it can understand is. So if I read that with nano, and nano is a text editor, es underscore input.cfg, you can press tab to auto-complete what you're typing there. Press enter, and you can see here that we've got two controllers. We've got the USB 2 axis, this is the iBuffalo, and down here is the more generic USB Joypad. So if either of those were plugged in, Emulation Station would just boot straight up and not ask for any configuration because it can understand how to use both of them. And you can see that the only bits that Emulation Station cares about are up, right, down, left, A, B, page down, page up, which is the shoulder button, and start and select. It doesn't use or need any of the other buttons. Okay, and if you wanted, for whatever reason, reset these or get Emulation Station to forget them, you can just take those lines out. So from this point here, this input config line here, down to input config here, you can just remove those, and it would effectively forget them and ask you to set them again. So you can do that with holding Control and K. It would take a line out, but obviously it's useful for Emulation Station to know what you want. You want to keep these three lines in here: input action, the command there, and input action, this whole section there, where it runs this command, because that's telling Emulation Station to be able to detect the controller it needs and also create the associated RetroArch file. Okay, so that's what we created. We added in these two sections. I'll quit out of that with Control X, and the section we're going to look at is if I change directory to /apt RetroPie, emulators, and RetroArch, and I'm going to go into that directory and list it. Now previously in different versions, different previous versions to Beta 4, there'd be a new directory here called configs, and it's not there anymore because it's not used anymore in Beta 4. So if you did look for a config directory here, that has now moved, and it's moved to this directory, which is apt RetroPie configs all. So in here, we've now got down here a directory called RetroArch-Joypads. Now this is effectively the same directory that used to be called configs up here. So this is now where RetroArch configuration files live. And we can go in there with cd RetroArch Joypads and list that. ls space -lah just to get a bit of detail. And you can see we've got two files. They were created a moment ago by the Emulation Station process, and these are the files that the games are reading. The games don't and can't read that Emulation Station file we saw earlier. It's got no relevance to them, to the games at all. The games RetroArch use these files here. And we can have a quick look at one of those. So if I edit them with nano again and USB, 2 axes, so this is the iBuffalo, open that up, I can see that I've got the buttons detected. So I've got my up axis, right axis, so to move up and right, and down and left. And intermingled in here, we've got hotkeys as well. So if I go down to, well, the very last option, enable hotkey button 6, that's the select key, which is there. So it says when I hold down the select button, I'm enabling hotkeys, and then I can use them. So, for example, there's a hotkey here to exit the emulator, which is button 7, which is the start button. So holding down select, press start, it will exit the emulator. Holding down select, press 5, which is the right button, saves my state, so like saving a game. And the left button will load the state, the hotkey. I've got the menu toggle, which is bringing up the RGUI, the graphical interface for the menu in RetroArch is 2, which is X, so hold down select, press X, you get that. Hold down B button and you will reset the game, like I did earlier. And also you can change the save slots, because you could have multiple save slots and you can just flip between them by holding down -0. So that's left and right. So holding down select, tapping, then left and right on the D-pad will change the save slots. So it just pre-populates it with default hotkeys. You can always change those or take them out altogether if you want. The only ones you really need are the directional ones, A, B, X, Y, etc. You don't have to have the hotkeys in there if you don't want, but obviously they're pretty useful. Quit out of that. It would be the same for the USB gamepad. It will look very similar in there. Edit that with nano USB _ gamepad. Again, there it's the same deal. You've got different buttons, so the enable hotkey select is 8 on that gamepad, but the principle's the same. It's got the same details, and that's how you can set up your USB controllers, really. Now let's say for whatever reason you didn't want those files to be there anymore. Let's take them out of that directory with rm star. That's delete everything basically, so you want to be careful with that command. But I can see that I'm in this directory, and then I can see in this directory I've got those 2 RetroArch folders, so yeah, that's fine. I want to delete all of those. rm star, done, list it, now there's nothing in there. So if I tried to open up Sonic now, it wouldn't move. I'd be able to use Emulation Station because that file's still there, but I wouldn't be able to play Sonic because RetroArch can't find these files because I've just deleted them. So another way of adding the controllers for USB setup for RetroArch is using the setup script. So you can get back to the setup area by CD and the tilde sign, which is usually next to the enter key, / RetroPie -setup. List that directory, and we're going to run this setup script here. And you need to prefix it with sudo because that will give supervisor permissions on that script, which is relevant. There we go. So sudo // that just forces it to look in this directory. Press enter. Now it's going to complain to me here that I haven't got much space, but that's just because I haven't expanded my card. If you get this error message, you either haven't expanded your card or you're filling up your SD card quite a lot. But you may well not get this error at all, so ignore that. Now in this setup, I'm going to go for option 3, and then down here, you've got one option here, 318, install RetroArch Joypad auto configs. If you're familiar with previous versions, a lot of the versions of RetroPie before pre-filled that directory we were looking at a minute ago with lots of different Joypad files, so you wouldn't have to set it yourself. You could just plug one in and it would probably be in that list and it would auto detect it. But at the same time, if you've got a load of files in there, sometimes it can make it a bit confusing. If you've got an issue with the Joypad, you don't know which of those files it was reading, or if there was maybe an error in that file, or if it was conflicting with a new one you generate. So by and large, you're better off not using all of those auto configs. But if you really want all those ones back, you can just press that and it will copy all of the auto configs back into that directory, and it will auto detect without you having to set the controller. Okay, so for example, what you could do is boot up into Emulation Station, just use one of the controllers that you configured earlier because Emulation Station knows about it, and then configure your RetroArch controller here, and the game would still work with your new controller even though you haven't configured it in Emulation Station, because all it cares about is the RetroArch controller, and if it's in the auto configs then it will just see it. But if we keep it blank, we won't run that. What we're going to do is this one, 319, which is configure your input device, and this is going to let us do it for just a specific joypad. Now I'm just going to go and grab one of those joypads. Right, okay, so I've got the RetroLink one, which is the USB gamepad. It identifies itself as USB gamepad, and I'm going to configure this up, and I'm going to press enter here, and it says, do I want to configure a joystick or a keyboard? I want to configure a joystick, and connect only the controller to be registered. Well, the iBuffalo one's pulled out anyway, so I've just got a keyboard and this USB in there. So I press enter, and at the top there it's just saying that it's identified one called USB gamepad, and the system can see this, that it supports well, it doesn't support feedback effects, which is fine, it doesn't vibrate or anything like that. It's got a driver for it, blah blah blah. It's just for information, you can ignore that largely, but you can see it, the name there, USB gamepad. Then this is just saying that maybe the joypad's got a state where it's one of the buttons are already depressed, so it's just saying make sure that it's all in a sort of neutral state, so just tap a few buttons on it and make sure nothing's depressed. Then when I press enter, it's going to ask me for the same sort of questions that the Emulation Station process did, except it doesn't wait for me to press it. It's got a 4-second timer on it all, so you have to be fairly on the ball when you do this just to get ready. So press enter. Okay, B, tap that. Y, select, start, up, down, left, right, A, X, left shoulder, right shoulder, and I haven't got any of these other buttons. But with this process, rather than holding one down, you just wait. I think it's a 4-second timer on each one. It'll just run through them all and time out. And what this is going to do at the end, it will write the file back into that directory where we just deleted the 2 files out of. So it's just really another way of doing the Emulation Station process. Also, I'd recommend, if you do this process, you write your joypad file using this way, make sure that you've quit out of Emulation Station before you do it, because there can be a conflict or lock on the controller, so that you can get an issue if you're running Emulation Station basically at the same time and run this, or at least I found that previously anyway. Okay, so it's just about to finish then. It's written the file, and it confirms the directory that we just looked at, apt RetroPie configs all RetroArch joypads, and this one's called USB gamepad.cfg, and it's saying that whenever RetroArch fires, it can easily see that that controller file. And you can put other settings in that controller file as well if you want. You could add other hotkeys or edit those existing ones. Okay, and cancel out of that, and cancel out of that. And let's check out that folder, apt RetroPie configs all, and it is the RetroArch joypad. There we go. So in that folder, we've got that file recreated. It's going to have the same contents. And as I said earlier, you can verify if you're running Emulation Station with processes use -u pi like that, ps space -u space pi, and it just says what's running at the time. And if it says Emulation Station here, you probably want to make sure you quit it using the whatever you've got plugged into the Pi, the TV or whatever, so it doesn't conflict with that process. But it's probably not that much need to use what we just did, that script, to get a RetroArch controller detected, because Emulation Station was quite happy to do it all itself and it works fine. So for USB controllers where you've just plugged in them in the Pi, that's essentially it. You do it through the Emulation Station interface, and if you want excuse me, if you want to get your particular joypad to be acting as pair 1 or 2, then just bear in mind that sequence that I described earlier, where you've got your 4 USB options: top left, top right, bottom left, bottom right, and that's ordered 1, 2, 3, 4 in that order. So it's top left is number 1, top right is 2, bottom left 3, bottom right is 4. And you could also see earlier where I pulled it out, it's quite sort of hot detection, hot plug if you like, and it's easy to sort of swap without having to restart the game, although it won't take a second if you really wanted to restart the game. And that's pretty much everything. It's very similar to previous versions of RetroPie to configure a USB controller, but it's just maybe a bit easier now that Emulation Station does it all for you. So if you've got any questions, as always, put them in the comments. If the video's been helpful, please click the thumbs up button, that really helps. And yeah, I hope that you now can see quickly and easily how to get up and running with your USB controllers. Thanks.